Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Andrew Larson, the Senior Vice President in the Civil Sector for Booz Allen Hamilton. Andrew, thanks for joining the show.
Great to be here with you, Justin. Thank you.
Great to have you here. And yeah, we're here to talk about IT modernization, perennial topic in government, enterprise IT, cybersecurity along with that becomes more important every single day. What do you think is particularly important today about how agencies are going about choosing the technologies they're using in their enterprise environments?
Well, you have to ask yourself first, what has changed? Technology has always been a very important enabler of our client missions. I think if you look at the broader context of the challenges our nation are facing, including climate change, the implementation of the infrastructure bill, modernizing aging infrastructure. This is putting incredible pressure on these agencies to perform. And technology as an enabler is becoming even more important than it ever was. But I think if you kind of reel it back a level and look at what the real challenges are there, I think it's one of cost optimization and increasing the return on investment. When you have to do more, often with the same, you got to be much smarter about your investments. And I think what we see with many of our clients is that they're starting to recognize, or many are along this path, and pretty far along it actually, to adopting enterprise approaches, enterprise thinking. And what I mean by that is looking at where you can deduplicate redundant effort across a larger enterprise or department or agency. By doing that, by kind of stepping back and looking at things holistically, you start to see where you're paying twice for the same thing. Or maybe you're not investing as wisely as you could in the right platform or tool sets. And when you're able to do that, then you start to see where those synergies exist, where the commonalities exist across an enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense conceptually. What's a successful approach to going about doing that, to looking across your enterprise and finding where you might be paying twice for things?
Right. Well, I think it starts with the acquisition strategies and approaches and how the government buys. So really a very effective acquisition strategy might involve performing those upfront analyses first and really looking for those inefficiencies, looking for those needed improvements, and helping that maybe as a first phase of a broader effort that an agency undertakes to do that, and then really get those objectives straight. For example, when you're investing in modern cloud technologies, right? What are you really after? Are you after cost savings? Probably. Are you after increased agility and faster time to delivery with features in your core enterprise services or applications? Are you looking for increased levels of preparedness for cyber threats and the ability to respond quickly? You really have to roll back and think about what the objectives are first, and then get those objectives straight. And you see many procurements that are coming out in this way that clearly define these objectives that are around de-siloing. They're around looking at what's common across an enterprise, what can be developed in aggregate as opposed piecemeal across different parts of a large department or agency.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. Do your homework up front with your requirements and
Correct.
State those clearly at the outset. We also see many agencies obviously have locations that are not just centralized here in DC. They're spread out across the country. They're focused on different things, maybe missions, as opposed to what HQ is focused on here in DC. And sometimes they're not using all the same technology. What are some of the challenges or gaps that you're finding across agencies in that regard?
Yeah, well, you look at how a large department, maybe that's comprised of, many are comprised of dozens of operating units or agencies. Each has its own unique and specific mission. And rightly so, those individual operating units or the component agencies have, to look at their technology leads a bit differently. But I think, back to my first point, if you kind of abstract and boil things down to the essence, every system has to be stable, right? It needs to, at varying levels, needs to scale. It needs to be secure. It needs to be highly available. Now that can vary. All of those things can vary. I mean, you might have, one part of an organization that has a classified and another that has an unclassified environment. You might have, within any given agency, higher availability needs. You need 5 nines of availability, where over here you don't. So there's variability in that. But kind of the core base needs of any system are those ilities. The performance, the availability, the high availability, the security. But I'd add on top of that, really agility and ability to respond. So back to your question about the challenges, I think the we're different mentality, like I said, has its right place. But often that gets in the way. And it can be, and it's really cultural or organizational barriers, I think, that present themselves and often prevent a large department or agency to moving to an enterprise approach. So to get there, 2 other barriers: organizational, cultural. There's trust, and there's transparency. And those are really, I think, key enablers when you develop trust, when you develop transparency, and when the parent organization is viewed as a trusted provider of those services, who understands, the child organization, if you will, within a large agency or department, then good things can begin to happen. But you can't get there until you develop the trust first.
Sure, that really makes a lot of sense. It's a great way of boiling down or really explaining the old saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? You can have a great strategy, but culture, organizational challenges could get in the way. If I'm a CIO here in DC, how do I establish that trust across my enterprise so that I can get after the objectives?
You'll see a lot of CIOs who are out on the road a lot, and meeting with those various parts of their large agencies that they serve, in order, for that very reason, to build the trust, to develop the understanding.
And then maybe on a more technical level, kind of understanding their requirements and identifying what are the common ones, and then maybe what are the special needs that they have. Yeah. I'm also wondering on the workforce side of this, are there common challenges to implementing an enterprise IT vision like the one that you've kind of laid out that you're seeing across agencies, and what are some successful approaches to having a workforce that can carry this out?
Well, if you look at the components of enterprise solutions these days, what are we talking about? Cloud, modern platforms, low-code, no-code platforms, open source architectures and technologies. Of course, on the cybersecurity side of the house, a host of advanced technologies. Those are hard things to hire for in industry, in the commercial sector. The government is really challenged to be able to hire the kind of talent that it needs to do that. And often, are finding themselves increasingly reliant upon industry to do so. But there are very committed and highly capable people in government, and I think, what kind of going back to this idea of scaling across an enterprise, what we see is very successful is where you have trusted counterparts in the government and in industry, and maybe the government counterpart is not down in the weeds of things. They're delegating really the responsibility to delivery, or for the day-to-day operations, to the contractor. They're not losing control. But they're able to scale because they're able to back off, but retain visibility, insight, and control over what's going on, because the government itself, especially given the challenges hiring capable people, it's very hard to build a large IT delivery organization within a government entity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and how does cybersecurity factor into this conversation? We just saw the Biden administration come out with a big cybersecurity strategy, talked about a safe digital ecosystem. That's obviously important for agencies
Right.
too. How does that factor into that relationship between the agency and the contractor, and how you're kind of working through those issues?
Right. That's a very good point. I think that especially in very large client environments, let me kind of take it back to the other endpoint of this, which is the source of the information that you need to manage your environments effectively. There's tons of sensor and log data out there. In some agencies, it's like terabytes per day of this log data that's coming in, and it's not being utilized.
Right.
And the reason it's not being utilized is partly because our clients don't have the right tools to do it. It's partly because of the federated nature of IT within these larger organizations. So I think one way to to react to that and to address some of those executive orders that are coming out, with Zero Trust and other presidential executive orders, is to really look at how you're managing your cybersecurity. There's tremendous value in that data, and if you can take that data and aggregate it, normalize it, and then have it in the same place where you can start to analyze it, you can probably apply advanced analytics against it, then you get to developing insights. You get proactive as opposed to being reactive. So I think that's a big area of opportunity that we see and among our clients, is really helping them. It's a way to stitch together an organization, because all that data exists. And sometimes it's in varying formats and it needs to be normalized, but it's doable. It's very doable. And you have to get over the trust barrier of sharing and opening up your log files and other endpoint data to be able to get to it, to be able to ingest it, to be able to look at it in aggregate in a normalized form, and then you can do predictive analytics against it. You can see your next threat emerging before it's really had an impact on your networks, or you can detect it much more quickly once there is an intrusion. So you're not waiting for months, like what happened with SolarWinds and with other major sorts of incidents of that sort.
Yeah.
I think that's one way. There's technological answers to this. Very often, technology is not the answer to everything, right? It's a tool, but there's the strategic application of technology really to advance the cause, if you will. And even in a large federated organization, it's one way to stitch together kind of the different parts of the organization and develop aggregate views into things that really help the entire organization at the headquarters level and out in the field offices and sites or wherever it is. They'll have access to the same tool sets.
That's a great point. I mean, I'm glad you brought up SolarWinds because obviously that really illustrated the challenges agencies face with taking advantage of log data. And sometimes cybersecurity can seem like such a mystery, especially to the non-technical folks, but there are hard technical techniques to getting after this.
There
right?
are. Yeah.
Well, in the couple minutes we have left, I wanted to just ask you, we've talked a lot about challenges, and you just really described a major benefit, a kind of broader view of looking at just this log data. But what are some of the other major benefits of looking at your IT from an enterprise perspective?
I think it's, like going back to my initial point, it's really cost optimization.
Yeah.
The government spends 80% of appropriated dollars on O&M, 20% on modernization. So when you start to look at things from it, they're taking an enterprise view towards information technology, you start to see the inefficiencies, the duplication of effort, the duplication of costs. That's one thing. You spend less to be able to invest more, and that can start a virtuous cycle of acceleration. I think the other part of it is agility, which is often overlooked or not thought about. But with more componentized, cloud native architectures, open architectures, open source, you're really able to drive toward increased agility because you're taking monoliths and breaking them down into components and deploying them in a way that they're reusable. So when they're reusable services, that's the very definition of de-siloing, really, at one level, is the core piece of functionality that you're delivering can be used, developed once and used many places across the enterprise.
Got it. All right. Well, that's a great way to end it. So again, I'd like to thank my guest, Andrew Larson, the Senior Vice President in the Civil Sector for Booz Allen Hamilton. Andrew, thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much, Justin.
Absolutely. I'm your moderator, Justin Doubleday, and you're listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Booz Allen Hamilton.